Continuing with the work of William Gibson, we're up to his third trilogy, which he wrote in the 2000s as the Sprawl trilogy, the Neuromancer trilogy. Bookended the 80s more or less and included a lot of the cultural elements going on, as the Bridge trilogy moved into the free market, free trade, end of the Cold War, massive movements of capital and technology undergirding changes, kind of 90s. So does the Blue Ant trilogy fit to some extent the zeitgeist of the 2000s. These books are called the Blue Ant Trilogy because they all feature as major elements a company called Blue Ant, which is this kind of like experimental marketing company run by a character named Hubertus Big End. I'm not sure how anyone's supposed to pronounce that. And his company is like a driving force in the action of the books. The books themselves, the first one is called Pattern Recognition. The second is called Spook Country. And the third is called Zero History. And it's dramatic to me that these books are not really science fiction. There's like a tiny touch here and there of something that could be actually called science fiction, but otherwise they are pretty much just set in the present day with real things going on, real technologies, perhaps occasionally, a little smoother than they really are or a little different than they really are. But essentially, we are in fictionally our own world. It's almost as though it was no longer necessary to undergo the conceit of setting these in the future, that we have caught up to a certain future already familiar from Gibson's earlier books, and in general, it's not good. It's just as things don't look good. It's just as difficult and bleak as his characters generally experienced reality in his fictional futures. Now the real world shares many aspects of that, and so we don't need the conceit of a fictional future anymore. We can just set it in the real world. Each of these books is pretty good on their own. They have elements that stand out. Probably Pattern Recognition is the best as a single piece of work, but there are major elements in the other books that kind of expand on the world of pattern recognition, and they share the same way of being a Gibson trilogy, which is, although the events of each book come after the previous books, they're not linked too directly to the previous books, and the links are more like some shared characters and shared themes. So in Pattern Recognition, we have a very clear statement on the part of, I think it's Big End. I should cover the book quickly. So in Pattern Recognition, the main character is named Casey Pollard. Casey Pollard, I think I mentioned earlier in one of these, she is a brand consultant. She consults on companies when they want to change their logo or their marketing imagery. And she does this without conscious thought. She's really, really sensitive to these things. It's like she has an allergy to bad brands. So you pay her and she'll come in and look at your stuff and just kind of say yes or no, and you can't ask her why. It's written in her contract. She can't explain why. She just has a sense for these things. This is a typical Gibson protagonist who has a specialized skill that keeps them going on the fringes of the sort of the world of real serious business. And I'd like to imagine there might actually be someone out there who's kind of like this. They're just really, really good, at least at telling what is going to work and what isn't. It's sort of like also a reductionist vision of the role. Reductionist vision? It is a vision of the reduced place for art and criticism in like free market capitalism. So someone does still need to decide whether a given product design or a given image is going to work or not, but they can no longer really tell you why. It's just intuitive. Nope, that's no good. Oh, that's good. That's hot. That's not. That's cool. That isn't. And there's probably a certain validity to that. It's very hard to explain. Sociologists have studied this in many ways. It's very hard for experts to explain how they do what they do. They're just experts. They're familiar with it to a very deep degree, and they can tell the difference between good work and bad work, but they can't usually articulate why very well because it's happening outside of the the formulative process. Does that make sense? So Casey sort of takes this to the nth degree, where for her it's like an allergic reaction. She literally is allergic to bad brands. At one point, her least favorite brand of all time is the Michelin Man. This is a very funny part of the book. And at one point, someone is trying to freak her out, and they leave a little stuffed toy version of the Michelin Man, where she'll find it, and she sort of goes like, ah, like if you found a spider. Uh, so, so the structure of the book is built around mystery. Honestly, Casey is in, like many Gibson protagonists, is in that sort of my life has fallen out of shape kind of moment. She doesn't have close attachment. She has a few friends. She's not. She doesn't have deep family connections. Her father has gone missing since 9/11. This is one of the first books that used 9/11 as a major plot point. Her father's a former CIA Cold War spy guy, and they were close, and she hasn't seen him, and no one knows what happened to him. Her mother is not in the picture, and she, she's staying alive, but doesn't really know what for. She's kind of like Deckard in the beginning of Blade Runner. They're making their nut. They're staying alive, but they don't have a goal. So she's approached by someone who has a goal, because one thing she does have is there are these bits of film footage, that are just popping up on the internet. In fact, now that I think on it, this is scarily like QAnon. Okay, forget it. No, we got to talk about it. There are these bits of mysterious footage, really well edited, beautiful footage, that are clearly all by the same creator, but no one knows where they're from. They're too well made to be like just made in someone's garage, but no one knows where they're from, and it's been happening for a while, and she finds herself really drawn to it, and she's been part of these message boards that like really seriously discuss it and try to put the pieces together. So she has a fandom, but the fandom is for something that is beautiful, but no one understands why. This is a major theme in Gibson's books. Now that I say it out loud, people have these responses to things that are beautiful, and they're drawn to them, and they want to protect them, but again, they can't articulate why or what makes them tick or what makes them work. It's a profound respect for that kind of subjective connection between a person and a work of art. One of the characters in Count Zero has it to the work of the surrealist artist Joseph Cornell, for example. And in Idoru, the teenage girl who's on the trip to Japan to find out what happened to her favorite band has this reaction to their music, but doesn't know why it's like this music. It's compelling. We don't always know why we're drawn to what we're drawn to, and even when we think and find connections, something always seems to be lacking. But it speaks to something deep in us. So she's part of this. Casey is part of this, very on a deep level, part of this fandom trying to explore what's the hell is going on with this footage. Because of that, she comes to the attention of Blue Ant, this marketing company run by this guy Hubertus Big End. And Hubertus Big End is maybe the most important character in this trilogy. And he wants to find the origin of this footage, because to him, this is marketable on some level. Whatever's here can eventually benefit his company if they can understand what it's made and why it's working, because it's a it's a sort of natural phenomenon, and he's interested in anything about communication or art or creativity that has not yet been turned to the market's use. And that is a powerful vision of the relationship between art and commerce. And Big End is like the gatekeeper. To some extent, he and his company, the people who work for him, they look for the what people are doing creatively that others respond to that no one's put a dollar on yet, and then they put a dollar on it. And Big N sort of, he knows this, and he's quite open about it at times. Other times he likes to give people a lot of guff about being a bohemian, and how this is sort of like his art, is to like pluck out of the ether of all that's going on in the world to find those things that, you know, could one day be turned into an ad or something, and then pluck them out. So he's like, oh, he's a great character. He is the personification of like post Cold War international business, especially the parts of it that pretend to be about more than just making money, that pretend to be serving like deeper human values. And I do say pretend. I think it's pretty clear in the books that Big End is full of it. He's learned how to talk about like art criticism, and he's learned how to like flatter creators a little bit, but fundamentally he's about market dominance and market power. But what he's learned is, in order to do that, in order to get there, part of his niche in the market is to make unusual discoveries, and unusual discoveries require doing things that other firms wouldn't do. So they invest in these long quests, for in his case, like to find this footage. Like he calls it at one point, or someone says, he says it's like my business's unconscious mind. So they have these projects that they're not sure where they're going or where they lead, but they have faith that some of them will pan out and eventually produce a marketable asset. So he sets Casey on the trail of this, and she follows back and forth across the world. At one point she goes to Tokyo, at another she's like making a trade with this guy who knows how to get a favor from a system to get an IP address they need. She's still showing up on the message boards, but basically it's a quest story, and that's kind of what Big End's good at, is finding people who already want to find the thing he wants to find. So he's monitored the boards, and he's identified her as someone most likely to get to what he wants. And she eventually winds up in Russia, in that kind of post, early Putin's Russia, where, you know, the kleptocrats and the plutocrats are becoming like major elements in the country's life. Gibson really likes to write about this element of the world. Like he often touches on, you know, the Russian mob or Russian capital, and it comes up even more in his next book. So this is a continuation of that, is what it's like for, you know, the former communist country to suddenly join the great mechanism of the world's markets, you know, when they're already so far along, and they suddenly just leap in all, you know, and plunge in, and what changes that unleashes. Like other characters in Gibson's books, Casey does eventually find what they're looking for, and even though she does not maintain any kind of control or even really input on what will happen, she does get some personal fulfillment and release from a lot of the ennui and melancholy that she has been experiencing. She makes some meaningful connections, not just with the art, but with people. I think, now that I think on it, a major element in Gibson's books, I'm always saying this, a major element in Gibson's books is finding the people behind the art, finding the person behind the technology, finding the creator behind the creation, So you have this strong response to what is built, and then you go looking. And if you go looking, you find that the creator might not be what you need, but you'll find somebody who helps you. Someone who will help you in a way that just art can't. Gibson does generally defend the sort of person to person connection, the kind that really is only usually achievable in the real world, and doesn't overplay the connection between just like people and a fully artificial reality, either represented by cyberspace or art or architecture. He generally does say that making connections with real people is a good thing. Okay, moving on to the second book. Second book is Spook Country. I like Spook Country. It was a lot of fun. I think it got all of his work tends to get mixed reviews, but Spook Country has a couple things I really like that are not in the earlier books nearly as much. One is it's got that world of covert operations, but whereas in earlier books, primarily the players were like corporations and underworld criminal types, this time we get the government involved at last. The government is not really deeply a thing in Gibson's books before Spook Country. Honestly, I mean it's there, it exists, but it's not really. It's not a player in events, and none of the characters involved in it think much about it or resort to it. This is one of probably the main features of cyberpunk fiction generally, and certainly Gibson's work, which is that the government really doesn't matter that much. It's just taken for granted that the people who make a difference are moving outside of government authority and government structures. But this time they're back. The government's back. There is still there's definitely still underworld stuff, and there's little bits of corporate power. But this time, the government, specifically sort of a rogue conspiracy inside the U.S. government that is trying to illegally, covertly profit off the war in Iraq, is back as a main player and as the main antagonist. The main character is, in this case, a former alternative rock lead singer who gets pulled into this with Big End. Big End again is trying to discover some stuff that will be advantageous to his company, and in the course of it he stumbles across, or the main singer, the singer who he recruits, he sends her around and she stumbles across both this conspiracy of war profiteers, and they're pretty mean, they're pretty brutal, and a counter conspiracy to frustrate them. She's like many Gibson characters, she's more of a spectator than anything else, who happens to have stumbled across this and then just kind of be witnessing it and putting the pieces together, which is that essentially there's a quiet war going on in this post 9/11 America between the people who want to expand U.S. Violence and authority around the world as a way for them to make money, and people who want to stop that. So the main character, whose name eludes me, but she was part of a band called The Curfew, and she, like Casey, is in that "What Do I Do Now" stage. She's lost a friend to a heroin overdose. She has friends. She's not with anybody, and she is sort of just easily led to follow these people around, just learning about what's going on. At the end, she makes a connection with one of the counter conspirators, one of the sort of the good guy conspirators who are trying to frustrate these war profiteers and get them caught. All of the machinations in this book are pretty good fun. There's schemes and there's surveillance and there's a fun, we're gonna sabotage their plan, and they won't even know it until it's too late, kind of thing. The antagonist, the conspiracy, is represented mostly by this one guy who's definitely what we might now call like an alt-right jerk, who is not a nice man and totally willing to murder if it seems to be in his interests. But the part of the book that jumps out at me, really jumps out at me, is Gibson's portrayal of one of the point of view characters, which is this guy, Milgram. Milgram works with the antagonist, the guy who's trying to like get all of this money into the country illegally and further these war profiteers' aims. He works with this guy because he's addicted. He's an addict, and this guy has him more or less on a string because he controls the supply of his drug. So as long as he works for this guy, he's going to get his drugs. And the reason this guy needs him is because as part of the plot, he needs to understand messages that are being sent in an argot, I guess, a criminal argot called Volapuk. Because there's like these Russian guys, and there's this way to like do fake Cyrillic using an alphanumeric keypad. It's a real thing. Most of the stuff in Gibson stuff is real. So he wants to follow these messages, and he doesn't know this, but Milgram does. So he's got Milgram there as his like translator canary, who reads messages for him, and then he gets his drugs and he moves on. The reason I find Milgram so interesting is, like Casey, to some degree Milgram is the market's ideal consumer taken to its natural limit, which is an addict. He's an addict. He has one thing that gets him going, and if he gets it, he will do his work, and then when he isn't asked to do his work and when he's not needing his drugs, he just kind of like sits there. The drug has kind of replaced his will almost completely, his curiosity almost completely. It's almost all gone. Basically, Milgram is almost all gone. He's not the first character like this in Gibson, but he's like the best drawn version of it so far in his work. And he's kind of aware of what's going on, but he's really passive about it. He doesn't really approve of what the guy who gives him the drugs is trying to do, but he doesn't care about it enough to really approve or disapprove. And by the end of the book, he's out of this guy's control, and he's caught on with Big End, who Big End thinks this guy might know something useful to him and is keeping him on, but there's no sense of like where he's going to go as a person. In the book, it serves the purpose of helping us to follow the bad guy's actions so that we'll understand the plot, but it's also a pretty good picture of how addiction replaces everything else connected with it. And that image of like the totally addicted person who is just like stuck in, what do they call it, a Skinner box, where they just do the job and they get the pellet, and they do the job and they get the pellet. That's kind of Milgram, and I don't think it's a coincidence that his name is Milgram, like in a callback to the famous psychologist Stanley Milgram and his work on how people will be obedient to authority even when it causes harm to others, because that's the role he plays. He translates these messages even when he's pretty sure that doing so is going to cause other people harm. At one point, the point at which Milgram kind of gets away is when he almost accidentally, like just casually points out that someone who the fixer he works for is worried about is like, yo, there he is, he's right over there, and the guy sees this and immediately tries to kill him, and Milgram doesn't really feel anything about this. He's just like kind of like not really there. He's like a pretty empty suit of a human being. And that sets us up for the last book, Zero History. Because in Zero History, both the singer from the Curfew and Milgram come back as our main characters. Zero History, to some degree, is more of a continuation of Spook Country. There's a new antagonist also in the world of like profiting through paramilitary action. Milgram has now been taken under the wing of Big End, who's used him for some, quasi cryptic missions, and Big End has found that Milgram's actually quite good at it because he doesn't really care very much about what's going on. He's pretty good at just following the mission and noticing what he notices. He has a good memory and a good eye for detail, and then just coming back and sort of dispassionately reporting what happened. So Big End has also been funding him with some addiction treatment to get him off the pills, and they've got him onto something healthier. I think it's heroin he's addicted to, and now maybe they've got him on methadone. It's something like that. And because of that, Milgram is coming back to life a little bit at a time. And I love watching this character who was essentially a dead weight cipher in Spook Country coming back to life and discovering that he has opinions and feelings about things and the ability to take action on them. He gets intuitions and acts on them in ways that, they're not always safe, but they're generally correct. And he even, Gibson's very nice to him in Zero History. Milgram's like, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way through the book, and he's really attracted to this one woman in the book, and she turns out to be attracted to him too, and they sort of get to fall in love, and at least a little bit, and be happy, which I think is nice. I like to feel that's achievable. Our singer in the Curfew also has separated from the guy she met at the end of Spook Country, and is now in London, and intersecting with an old bandmate who is much more aggressive and on point and willing to take action than her, which is good. And she intersects again with the sort of counter conspiracy. So it turns out, in this case, the antagonist is another one of these like paramilitary groups of dorks who run around the world telling governments that they're Rambo, and they wrongly suspect her, the singer, of frustrating them or tipping the police to them or somehow. So they're targeting her, and her bandmate friend helps her out a bit, but she's in danger, and she reaches out to the guy from the end of Spook Country. They reconnect both on a personal level. He turns out to have been badly hurt, and he's ashamed of it and thought that she wouldn't want to be with them, but they have a nice recovery of their relationship where they realize they do want to be together, and she tells them about how she's being targeted by these guys. And then the last 100 pages are this guy throwing together, with the use of his connections in the sort of shadowy spy underworld, throwing together an operation to really get these other assholes out of her life. It's really sweet. I don't know if it's actually good, but at the time it was satisfying. I think I said Gibson knows that the major forces of the world are really kind of neutral to humanity, especially to any one given person, but I think he generally is on the side of making personal connections. He does respect romantic love. He has a moment or two where he shows that he respects and values parental love, and he also does think, expressed in his fictions, that you can beat particular bad actors sometimes. You can beat them at their own game. You can knock out a sadist here and there. You can cause problems for them. At the very least, you can make them sit in their room for a while, even if they're going to be replaced by someone else, and that this is worth doing. So the singer's boyfriend, who is a kind of extreme sports enthusiast and has been working in this world of good guy spy operations for a while, he uses his connections to get some other people, and they put together this kind of showdown scene that's pretty fun, where they confront the the bad paramilitary guys and arrange for them to get in a lot of trouble again through sort of like a the Sting long con. You know, they don't know they're being played with, but they're going to get in a lot of trouble, kind of thing. And, uh, and that's satisfying. The MacGuffin of the story this time is that one of the guys who works for Big End has discovered a algorithm something that allows you to know what the market is going to want, like the total world market, a few minutes before the market knows. This is so hugely valuable. I don't think I have to explain it, but like basically you're going to see into the future, like 10 minutes into the future of the market. So Big End is happy because he's about to become immensely powerful. We see again the importance in Gibson of like the characters who have foresight, like Laney's ability to look through the nodes of information of the world and find what's relevant. This guy has now, Big N now owns this ability and can apply it to the market generally, so that the final scene of Zero History is Big End has bought like this gigantic hovercraft, like this huge James Bond villain style um, machine, and everybody is on it. They don't know exactly where they're going or how the thing works. They know that Big End's in charge, and they have some decent relationships among each other, and they have some complicated relationships among each other. And that is such a nice picture for how it feels to be floating on the vast boat of international capital, not only when the book came out in 2010, but now in 2022. That's a pretty good image. Milgram has come a little back to life. He's got this good relationship, at least to the end of the book. It's pretty good, with a woman who turns out to be Big N's daughter, and you know, he's got all the kind of feelings. She's one of the daughters who wants her dad at a long distance, though. You know, she dresses all punk and she builds things, and she's one of these people who, like, they might have to be here among capital, but they don't like it, which is a, you know, a hell of a lot of us and a lot of people in Gibson's fiction. It's like, yeah, I have to work here, but I'm not thrilled about it. So everyone's on Big N's boat, floating along a couple feet above the water, arguing about whether he's a villain or a hero, and wondering where the hell they're going. That's not a bad picture at all, to leave a trilogy on and to leave the state of William Gibson's world on. Okay, those are the three trilogies that Gibson has finished. The next one that we'll talk about is his latest work, which, again, continuing the line of his fiction, it's really fascinating to watch his major themes return, to see the shifts that make. We're back to actual science fiction. He's only finished 2 books of this, but I believe the 3rd book is coming. He's tweeted about it or something, and so I think this will wind up being another trilogy. I don't think it has a name yet, but we'll call it the Peripheral Trilogy, after the first book, The Peripheral. So we'll talk about that next time.